Welcome to Help, I Have Kids. I'm your host, Pam Marshall, a mom of 5 and a pediatric occupational therapist with over 35 years experience. This podcast is designed to equip you with practical tools, insights from experts, and real life stories. Because at the end of the day, you are the head of your child's care team. Each week, you'll hear from pediatric experts and fellow moms like you that will help build your confidence. They'll offer clarity and empower you to make informed decisions that work for your whole family. Hi, I'm Pam, host of Help, I Have Kids podcast, and this is episode 5, gearing up for a great school year with our guest, Jamie Roig. Today, we're talking about all things school, 504 plans, IEPs, what are those, classroom accommodations, and how to advocate for your child with confidence. And I couldn't be more excited to talk to you today, Jamie. Jamie is a licensed psychologist with over 17 years experience helping families work with schools to support children's mental health and their learning needs. So, Jamie, I know you have so much knowledge and wealth. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I spent a good portion of my career working in the school system, and so I've worked a lot with families in that setting, but I also do have experience working in inpatient and outpatient mental health and developmental clinics. And so those have really driven and guided my experience and my expertise over the years.
That's great. And tell me a little bit. I know you're a mom, too. So
I am.
Tell me about your family.
I have an 11-year-old and I have a 14-year-old, and we'll be gearing up for middle school and high school next year.
Wow, those are 2 big jumps, aren't they?
Yes, they are big jumps. I'm a little nervous about high school, but I think it'll be okay.
And once you get to high school, I know if you're a mom like me, you're thinking, oh my, it's only 4 years left. Like it just goes so fast.
It does go fast.
It's neat. Well, today we're talking about the overwhelming process of supporting your child at school when they have needs. So before we dive into that topic, I want to ask you my favorite question, which is, what's something like a piece of advice or encouragement that's been your favorite that someone offered you as a mom?
That it's okay for your kids to struggle. We get so caught up in like everyone needs to be the best, everyone needs to win, everybody needs to be top of the class, but everybody can't be, and that's okay. So accepting that and just knowing that it's okay for your kids to struggle a little bit. They learn a lot from that.
Yeah, struggling's good. Problem solving, that's good. That's a great piece of advice. For the parent who thinks there might be something going on with their child and they're seeing them struggle, they don't know what to do, how to bring it up, where should they start?
So that is a little bit age dependent for the child. So I'm going to speak about school age children first. If your child is in school, the first place is to start is you can contact their teacher. I know that gets a little harder at middle and high school because they have so many teachers. So in that case, it might be the guidance counselor, but you would be surprised how many teachers are afraid to bring up concerns to parents. And there's lots of valid reasons for that.
Right.
Sometimes, teachers are used to getting resistance when they bring up concerns. And so I would say that's the first step. Sometimes just opening that door and saying, calling or messaging the teacher and saying, I have these concerns. Do you share them? Can we sit down and talk about them? Opens up the door.
That's so good. And isn't it true? I found that emailing the parent or the teacher was a great way, to communicate. Is that true? Do you think emailing is a good place to start?
Email, or if they have another communication system, so many teachers will use different platforms now. That is a great way. What I would caution you against is writing like a 5-page novel. Right. Because details will get lost. And sometimes things don't translate as well in that written format. So I would say an email is perfect. Maybe keep it concise. I'm having some concerns about their social skills and they're falling behind in reading. Can we set up a time to talk about this?
That's great. So my next question is, can you break down the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP? Those are terms. What is an IEP? What does that stand for? And you break those terms down and help parents understand them, because maybe their child could benefit from one of those.
Sure. So a 504 plan is based on the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so you can actually have a 504 plan in schools, in employment settings. It's why you see wheelchair ramps when you go in buildings. And so any child who has a diagnosed medical condition, and then also there's some evidence that they're struggling in school, can be eligible for an 504 plan. Every school has a system. For instance, where we are in Lexington, you go to the school guidance counselor. Other counties, other states have different people that manage that process. But it's generally you meet, you talk, you go over, usually have to have some data. And that's a big scary word when you talk to schools. They always tell parents, well, we need data. And
Like,
what is that data? What are you talking about? But that can be things like, how many times have you had to go to the doctor? How many times has your child gotten a behavior write-up? How has their test progress looked over time in the classroom? And if they have evidence to support that, there's a team that meets and can determine if they're eligible for a 504.
So do they need to have a medical diagnosis? Did I hear you say that to have the 504?
99% of the time. There are some school systems that have professionals in the school that can provide some diagnoses for things, say, like ADHD. However, that's very rare and not the norm.
So really pursuing that with your pediatrician or your primary doctor is a good place to start.
Yes, it really is. And there's paperwork that your primary doctor will need to fill out for that process.
That's good.
And so what a 504 provides are modifications. And so when they talk about modifications in the school system, they're talking about altering the environment so you can just access the learning. So that can be things like you need to sit closer to the teacher because you're having a hard time paying attention. That could be we need to put a ramp in this hallway because you cannot walk on stairs and we don't have a ramp. So it's just altering that environment so you can access it more easily.
And sometimes children need to actually have their own space or sit away.
Yes.
Like maybe that's a good thing. You know, we used to think, oh, can't have any child separated. But there are some children who actually do better with that. You know, they don't need that movement around them and they're asking for that. They're wanting that. So it is unique to each child.
Yes. And the goal of that committee is to look at the child and try to determine their unique needs and then plan that. And so when an IEP comes in, this starts a whole new process, a whole new different set of state and federal regulations. It's all based out of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which has been enforced since the mid-'70s. And this is for our students who have significant disabilities, but then also we have a documented educational impact, meaning that if we just put them in a regular classroom, even with modifications, they're not going to be able to access the curriculum and learn like we would expect. So for a child to receive an IEP, it's a very long process. It's a complicated process, and it's often very difficult for parents to understand. And it's all based on state and federal regulations. And so there's a lot of red tape with that process, and there's a lot of steps and processes. So I do try to always explain to parents, what's the first step, what's the next step. The very first step is with a referral. Every school will have a designated person you make that referral to. And then that varies by where you live, who you make that. Like in Lexington, all schools have a person called an achievement compliance coach but in other counties, you might reach out to the guidance counselor for this.
It might be.
It depends on your school
a different
system.
title of that person.
So it requires an evaluation process by a school-based evaluation team. And that process can take, depending on where you live, somewhere from a month to 3 months. You also have to have documentation that there was intervention and that the intervention did not work for the child. So that's a piece that sometimes is a hang up because you might anecdotally see a child struggling, but their reading scores aren't going down or they're not going up, or they are going up. Sorry. Their reading scores are going up. And so there's a whole team that works on that process, and then at that point, they determine if you're eligible for services. If you're eligible for an IEP, then you become eligible for accommodations and, modifications and accommodations. And accommodations are when we start altering the curriculum so you can access it. That's when we start changing how we're teaching the content. It might be we're going to pull you out into a smaller setting to teach a different reading program. It might be, you know what, we've identified that you have social skills deficits to the point that it's preventing you from participating in your classroom. So now we're going to pull you out and provide special instruction on social skills so you can access the curriculum when you're in the classroom. And there's group learning or whole class discussion.
So it's really good that it's tailored to each of the child's needs.
Yes.
So parents that have children with some significant disabilities, they can know that there's this range of services that their child may receive based on this IEP, based on the findings of the team. And and how does a parent, like, is there a recommendation of places they can go read about an IEP? I'm sure they could just Google it, but what's a trusted resource for
Your
that?
best resource is going to be contacting the person in your local school system, because there are the regulations and like you said, anyone can pull those up and read them, but sometimes there's little nuances in certain states or in certain districts about how they like to handle those procedures. And most of the materials out there are written in a way that even as a professional that works in that field for a lot of times, I'm like, what are they even saying?
What are they talking about? Right.
But the representative at your school system will be able to provide you with your parent rights as well as explain the process.
And it's really changed a lot in the last 30, I've been a therapist 35 years, just over the years, from the first IEP meetings I've been to later one, just what a big change this whole process has been for students that need it. So let me ask you a question about, it can be really intimidating for parents to speak up and advocate. And I'm thinking of you moms who have to advocate medically for your child. Your child may have a lot of medical needs, but then they also have a lot of learning needs and a lot of educational needs. But what advice do you have for the mom that wants to advocate for their child, but, there might struggle between, am I being pushy? Is it too much? Is it not enough? What's the right way to advocate as a mom?
The best way is to try and be proactive. So that means leading into the new school year, go ahead and reach out to the teacher. I've never met a teacher who was just completely unwilling to have a meeting before school starts and maybe get a game plan, because that's going to give everybody a better start to the school year. The other thing I would recommend is listen to the feedback you get. I've had situations where, a parent has sent an email, for instance, and they've kind of put a list of things they want for their child. And those all might be really great things for their child. Nobody's saying your child doesn't need these things, but sometimes they're beyond the scope of what the school can offer for real reasons.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Or sometimes something you think would be best for your child, maybe their teacher disagrees. And so finding a way to have those conversations without anyone getting defensive, just trying to get the facts.
That's good advice. So what are some examples of accommodations? Like, I think about one of the most creative ones that I used. I got the privilege of raising 5 kids with my husband. But, as moms, we tend to be that leader in the home for medical and for education. So I did lead that for my child with ADHD. And, his main accommodation that stayed with him all the way through high school, like from the time he was diagnosed at 9 all the way through high school, was listening to music, that he was allowed to have headphones. And he used, big Bose, like, kind of headphones, and he listened to classical music, and it helped him when he had to take tests or had to have focused work. It helped him block everything out. So what are some maybe unusual accommodations or examples of accommodations that children can have?
So with accommodations, a lot of times what I see happening, or I did even when I was still in the schools, is an extra teacher pushing into the classroom to provide targeted instruction when they see a weakness. So, for example, if you have a child who has some reading deficits, but you really want them in the regular classroom so they're hearing everything, they're with their peers, it might be an extra teacher who pushes in and pulls them out for just 5 minutes at a time here, 10 minutes at a time there, to really hit some of those skills that they're missing, but not completely pulling them out of the classroom.
So I bet that's unknown to a lot of moms out there, that there can be an accommodation like that.
Yeah, and there is still this misconception that if you need an IEP, that you're just going to be you're going to be pulled out of that class. You're going to go to a different class, and that's really not how things have happened in the last 20 years.
Right.
We always talk about least restrictive environment, meaning what is the least restrictive place you can receive your services. So if you're a child who can be in a regular education setting and receive all your services in that setting, we try to push in, or schools try to push in.
And I've seen sometimes where those teachers push in and they might work with a small group of children, maybe in math, that are struggling with the math concepts, or and that's, I'm sure a lot of parents don't realize that a teacher can come in and have maybe one small table of children working together and work on those
The
skills.
other thing I would say is a lot of people think about special education and they think about it being academic focused.
Right.
But we know now with so many things, ADHD, autism, anxiety, all of these other things kids are dealing with, that sometimes they need more than just academics.
Right.
And so sometimes on an IEP, for instance, you might have specific goals for social interaction, because we know that those skills lead to being successful in a classroom.
Right. So how can a parent with a young child, like when you think about a young child with autism, what a big step for the parent to release this baby into school where maybe they're not great communicators, and trusting that, everything's going to be done for their child.
And that is just being proactive. The sooner you get to find out who their teachers are, of course, there's always that barrier of when the school year starts and when you get that information. But the more you can communicate with them up front, I find the more comfortable you'll be, and it leads to a better trusting relationship. I definitely think if you have a situation where maybe you're not feeling like your child's taken care of, that's the point you can just reach out to maybe even like the school guidance counselor, or if they have an IEP, most schools do have an assigned school psychologist that you can reach out to and just say, I'm feeling unsure about this. I need to know how it's going. You can ask for progress reports. There's a lot of different ways. It just depends on the certain situation.
And how are schools dealing with, like, when children are flight risks, or maybe they have some self-injurious behavior? Because I know that's a big one for moms too.
It is a big one.
Concerning.
And that has to be a very specific conversation and discussion. And again, that's going to be individualized. So there's no kind of one size fits all. Of course, if there are either of those concerns, there's going to be a lot more increased, just what they call it, adult support.
Right.
Which means extra eyes on the child to monitor that. In some cases, if a child has recurrent kind of self-injurious behaviors, that's when you need to sit down and write a plan for what are we going to do? What is our reactive plan if this should happen? So the mom knows exactly what's going to happen and how it's communicated to her.
How it's going to be handled. That's good. Can you think of some other maybe situations that moms aren't familiar with that schools do, some of those other accommodations that they do that might be helpful for them to know?
Well, some things that are important to know is that school speech language therapy and school occupational therapy and school physical therapy can potentially be an option for a child with an IEP. It looks a little different than private therapies, though.
Yes, it does. We've been talking about this on some other episodes, too, that private medical-based therapy really is a completely different approach, and we want to be partners together with the school because we're all part of that medical home or that school home, all the professionals working together.
Yes, so just keeping in mind that those services may be available, but your child may very well qualify for that medical-based therapy, but not the school-based.
Yes.
The school-based therapies are really designed to tailor what exactly do they need to access their IEP and their education.
And I've had some of those conversations over the years with parents. Like an example is if your child, maybe they walk with a walker, and they're walking sufficiently with the walker to get from point A to point B. There are no stairs in the school or no obstacles because there's ramps, and maybe they don't need physical therapy because they can transition in and out of their chair. They can use their walker. They're independent. They might not need physical therapy, but they may go see a physical therapist because their legs are weak or because they're.
And one of the other things too, a school-based physical therapist will likely still evaluate that child for things like stamina.
Right.
So there may not be any stairs in the building, but can they make it from their fifth grade classroom all the way down to the opposite hallway for art?
A long walk.
Right? And sometimes it may not be that they qualify for therapy at school, but we're going to come up with some solutions so they're not getting so exhausted with such a long walk.
And even accommodations on the playground. So if you have a young child, Recess is part of their day, part of their education, and PE is as well. So sometimes there needs to be accommodations there too.
Yes, common one that gets overlooked when parents have children who have vision needs. There are actually functional vision and mobility specialists that do work with the school systems and will evaluate children to see what kinds of things they can do to make the buildings more accessible. I've had students who've had visual impairments, and it might be like we had one situation where reflectors were put on the door frames because he had a vision concern and he would run into the door frames. But with that indicator on, he could see that better.
Oh, that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard this story that one of our physical therapists in the outpatient setting helped a young student who was older in high school age, but I think maybe middle school age, wanted to navigate independently, but was unable because of vision, poor vision. And the barrier was not being able to get feedback from the walker, like when the student was running into things. And so our physical therapist worked with some students in a college, a university, that came up with putting sensors on each corner of the walker, and therefore the sensors gave feedback, and now the student can be independent and doesn't have to have someone guide them and walk them everywhere. And it's so great. We had such a fun celebration.
That is a very cool
creative way option. Well, I think there's a lot of creative solutions is, I think, a takeaway that moms listening could hear, that both your private professionals as well as your school-based professionals can work together to come up with strategies to help children in the learning environment. So also, these conversations are so emotional. We as moms, want the best for our children.
You've worked with me in the capacity as a family. You might have seen me tear up before because I feel that. I wear that on my sleeve. They are hard. What I would say, if you're reaching out to the school system to talk about these things, one, this isn't the first child who's had these concerns they've had. That's always the first thing I hear. Like, have you ever dealt with a child? If you have somebody who's not a first-year teacher, this is not the first time. And I've never worked in a building that was all first-year teachers. If somebody has heard this concern before, they've had a student with maybe not exactly the same, but maybe some similar needs, and they are not the first mom to go through this. I think about my team I left, and I had parents. Well, they weren't parents. I had colleagues on my team that had students who had their own children who had gone through some of these things. So if you take the time to have those conversations, a lot of times you will find there's a fair amount of empathy or sympathy depending on someone's situation. And that really everyone's there to help your child.
Yes. And all the professionals, most of them are parents is what you're saying. And they've walked this journey a little bit maybe, or they know people who have. And so I think that's good to remember, that you don't have to fear being too much or out there, emotionally.
There are a couple things that just reminders that I think parents need to know is teachers are very busy during the school day.
Yes, they are.
A lot of times they're not getting breaks. So if it's an emergency and you can't get a hold of your child's teacher, you can always call the office, call the guidance office, and they will get back to you as soon as they can. It used to happen to me when I worked in the school, though. I was in multiple buildings. And so I even had in my phone voicemail that if it was an emergency, contact these other people, because it might be a few days before I'm back to where, and at that time, your phone was physically located in a place. And I would have parents sometimes get upset, like, I called you last Thursday, and I'm like, well, it's Monday, and I'm so sorry I haven't been back to the school. So if you don't hear back, reach back out. And sometimes if it's an emergency, call the front office, call the guidance office. But just know people, in my experience, are doing the best they can to stay on top of everything. And sometimes communication gets missed.
Right.
Sometimes an email just finds its way into junk mail. And so I would say have a little bit of grace for that, but just follow up.
Yes. Be persistent and proactive. I like that word, proactive, a lot. I think we moms, that's our number one job, being proactive.
That's what I would always say. I kind of always, no matter who I was consulting with, I would say, what's your proactive plan? What's your reactive plan?
That's a good way to phrase it. I like that. So let's talk about the emotional child. So we've talked about, some big things like autism, ADHD, but for the mom that has maybe their teen is going through maybe they've been hospitalized emotionally for just what they're going through. And maybe they have a psych diagnosis or, they're dealing with severe depression, anxiety, something that is making it very difficult to get them through their school day. And where's the help for those children?
What I will say is that really takes a school community partnership. So in those kinds of situations, help in one setting generally is not most effective. At the school level, there are options. I have seen students that have had emotional diagnoses that have a 504 plan that can make some allow some of those things to be changed throughout their day. I've also had students that have those issues going on that do qualify for an individualized education plan. And so there are options within the school system. If you're in a large county, like Fayette, where we are, they have some alternative programming with different sites that are smaller, with fewer people, fewer numbers of teachers, those kinds of things. And so it really it depends what options are available in your county, but there are options. There's also in many schools now mental health providers that are able to check in with students and work with students and kind of help them, especially through that transition back to school and making sure they're coming to school happy, healthy, all those things.
Yes. And I have also noticed some alternative schools that are opening up, maybe children who have been through trauma or are in the foster system or, just have experienced some really unusual trauma in their life. Yes. That there are some options for those children too.
There are programs what they call intensive outpatient that are run by medical facilities. And those have been around for a very long time. But there is a trend popping up of private schools that are also providing that intensive outpatient therapy. And that model is getting a lot of good traction. And some of the initial research is saying it's better for kids overall because they're not missing out on school, but they're still getting their treatments and their therapies. Yeah. And so I think we'll probably continue to see those pop up.
Yeah, and it's probably a helpful thing. So, it would be unrealistic to think the school could handle that level of care. And so great for that student who needs it to be in that kind of environment. Yeah, that's good. So kind of to wrap things up here, I heard you say that if you moms that suspect something going on with their child, and this is new, the whole journey of 504, IEP, all these terms, and just how to get help for your child, is to start with your child's teacher, to start with your pediatrician. That's what I heard you say. Is there anything else you can think of that allows them to get the ball rolling, to get help for their child?
Well, I've been working with a lot of families recently that have had concern that maybe something was going on with their child, but they weren't quite right. Or they weren't quite sure, rather, it's a better word. They weren't quite sure what was going on. Were they, worrying too much, too little? And so they've come in and started with kind of a private evaluation to kind of guide what are my next steps. And so in that situation, it can be helpful because at least they can come to the school informed. I've sought this evaluation elsewhere. This is what, we kind of talked about. These were the recommendations. So that is one option. The other option is really just to get to know what your rights are. So with a 504, anyone can make that referral at any time, okay? And if you just contact your representative at the school, you get a packet and there's a physician questionnaire. Special education is a little more complicated than that.
It's a little more involved, yes.
Now, they say, yes, anyone can make a referral, but you have to provide evidence for the referral at the time of making that. So if a parent does really want to make a referral, they need to contact their school representative, and they'll tell them exactly what is needed to proceed with that referral.
That is good. And tell me one more thing. When those parents reach out and maybe they don't get the response that they were hoping for, what should they do? Like, say their school, we talked about maybe their communication got lost, or maybe their child really doesn't qualify for that help. What do they do then?
I would recommend trying to reach out a couple of times, and if that doesn't work, you can always contact your school's Board of Education. All boards of education in public school do have a special education department that you can contact and reach there.
So you can call the special education department of your school district that you live in. That's good. Good to know.
One thing we didn't touch on, but I just want to briefly mention too, is about private schools and these services. What we've been talking about applies to public education and public education systems. There are some private schools that will agree to offer some extra supports and services, but they're not bound to anything. So once a child does have a 504 and IEP, the school district is legally bound to uphold that. So that just doesn't apply necessarily in the private school world.
Yes, that is good for parents to know that. And parents, you can always seek private help, a psychologist. We recommend definitely someone in the field of psychology. Being a diagnoser is best practice. I have seen recently some mental health clinicians, like with autism, for example, evaluating children, and it may not be the best practice solely for one practitioner to give an ADOS. That even if we want to talk about in autism, what you think is, an evidence-based good team of professionals to give that diagnosis. Do you want to talk about that for a minute before?
Sure, and I think I can also talk about the difference between a medical and an educational diagnosis of autism.
I think that would be helpful
because
for
that
moms.
Is something that comes up all the time.
Yeah.
So I'll start with your first question. So within just the way we've structured care and services and diagnosing autism, especially for insurance in the insurance world, they really want to see that a physician or a PhD level licensed psychologist has provided a full evaluation and diagnosed. Yes. With that, they also want to make sure that those professionals not only are licensed, but have also gone through different credentialing processes that really just ensure they have the training to be doing that. There are a lot of providers out there who've received some training that are actually pretty good at evaluating and identifying autism, but they don't have those other indicators that make it a medical diagnosis. There's a lot of confusion about what is a medical diagnosis, what is an educational diagnosis. And some of that depends on where you live, which makes the discussion even more confusing. So if you live in Fayette County, where we are, for instance, they have highly trained licensed psychologists doing autism evaluations in the school system. However, they don't have the credentialing. They don't have that officially makes it a medical diagnosis.
That carries it over to
medical.
I
will tell you, they do the exact same thing I do. Very highly trained clinicians. They just don't have that piece that makes it medical. Now, in some counties, though, to be eligible for an IEP in the category of autism, you don't have to have a medical diagnosis of autism. You have to meet a checklist of characteristics set forth by the state. So in some, especially in rural counties, you will have children that go in and the school says, we can say you meet this educational diagnosis of autism because you check these boxes and we have proof you check these boxes.
Then you can't apply it to medical.
Yeah, correct. Though. Yes. So it gets them an IEP, which is great. It gets them access to the school services. But then that parent is like, I want to start ABA. And they go and they're like, I'm sorry, your insurance says you have to have a medical diagnosis. And then they have to find a provider. And unfortunately, we have a shortage of providers in the community that are able to provide those diagnoses.
Long waiting lists.
Yes.
So hopefully that clears up some of that confusion for the moms listening, that there really there is a difference between an educational diagnosis and a medical diagnosis. And especially the hot topic is with autism and getting that diagnosis at a young age so these children can get early intervention.
What I will say is if I do have a child that comes from one of these systems that has highly trained people who have the credentialing to be doing this, and I get their evaluations, I can do kind of an abbreviated evaluation to confirm it. I still have to see some things. I still have to document some things myself. And so that can, make it a faster process.
Right.
But it is an interesting kind of dilemma we've gotten into about
It is.
What are we doing here? We have a shortage of providers. Why aren't we finding a way to bridge this gap?
Yes.
between the two.
And if we could just get our medical insurance companies sitting down with our
Wouldn't that
providers
be lovely?
and yes, supporting what we do. But we're so happy to have you today. You're just a wealth of knowledge of helping parents navigate this confusing thing of advocating for their child.
I will also, just one thing to add, and I love our pediatricians out there. I love my children's pediatrician. I call him for so many things. And he will own. He's like, I really don't know much about special education.
Yeah.
Because it's a whole nother specialty.
It really
is. A whole
whole nother world. Yeah. So that's good advice as well, as don't expect your pediatrician to be able to answer all your questions about education. You really have to go to the educators.
Yes.
To get those answers. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, is there a last, encouraging, hopeful piece for parents navigating this world of advocacy for their child?
Well, I think it's really important to know. I mean, I've worked in probably 40 different school buildings, and I've never found somebody who just wasn't willing to help a child. I've maybe worked with some people who maybe needed some guidance to try something a little different, but at the end of the day, the people there, I really believe, are there to help your children, and they love your children.
Yes.
They really do.
So that's a loud message, is you can trust your school to help you. They're going to help you.
And, you see things in the news. I know there's a few instances that come up that maybe somebody was not trustworthy. That is not the generalization.
Right.
Those are outliers for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Good, solid information. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much for listening to Help, I Have Kids. If you're tuning into this podcast, that means you're a mom who's curious, committed, and ready to learn. And we see you. We'd love for you to join our Help, I Have Kids Facebook community, where moms just like you are connecting, asking questions, and encouraging each other every day. It's a space for real conversations, expert insight, and support from moms who get it, because we're all in this together. And if you know a mom who's feeling unsure or maybe overwhelmed, or just needs to be reminded that she can do it, she can advocate for her child with confidence, share this episode with her. We're building a village here, and we're glad you're a part of it.
Marshall